Our speaker presenting Is Continuous Mobile Testing Impossible? Is Frank Moyer, the CTO of Kobiton. With that, I'll hand it over to Frank.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla, and thank you for all those who are attending. Today, I'm going to go through with you the goals of continuous testing. How do we achieve it? And it's focusing on mobile. How often have we heard this? You know, the testing needs to be finished by tomorrow. At least once we've been confronted with this request by our managers. Something's happened with development, it's fallen behind, or we have a big press release that we're announcing tomorrow, and everything needs to be ticked and tied with the app, ready to be deployed tomorrow. There's no budge. And we as testers, you know, we know the challenges to achieving that, but for mobile testers, it takes on a different meaning. And I'm going to talk through a lot of the differences for mobile and why it's different than other testing. So we've got this predicament, right? We can't do everything, and as testers, and test managers, we have scripts, and we have manual testing, and we have to decide what's the lowest risk if we're trying to get a release out as soon as possible. Do we update our automation scripts and incur the risk that something is broken with them, or do we just revert to manual testing, or do we do some combination of the two? And ultimately, you know, we have to prioritize our tests. You know, which ones should I execute on mobile and which devices? And you know, as we've done this maybe 2 or 3 times, we begin to realize that this is the value as testers we provide. It's as much telling or executing the tests and determining what bugs there are in the application. Our value to the company and our value to the product is making decisions on what to test and how to get it done efficiently. So, you know, when we move on and we talk about continuous testing, this predicament that we run into is, how do we prioritize? So I really haven't touched yet on you know, continuous testing and how do we get there, but I've talked about so far just the challenge and the predicament we have in terms of prioritizing as tests come along. So I want to talk about continuous testing's cousins. You've heard them often, the continuous integration and continuous delivery. Some will say it's continuous deployment, but so continuous integration is it's a process of building the source to create an executable or a set of executables that represent your product, right? That's what's being delivered, what's going to be tested. And the continuous delivery is that process of automatically delivering that executable or set of executables to an environment, whether it's your test environment or your production environment. And both of these continuous testing cousins, you know, what they require is writing a script, and that script typically doesn't change that frequently, right? That build script or that deployment script doesn't change that often, and it typically runs every night as part of what's often referred to as the CI/CD pipeline. So where should, you know, continuous testing be placed? If I were to look at that continuous testing, right? It's sort of like if there's such a thing as continuous coding, right? Everyone seems to lump continuous testing with continuous integration and continuous deployment. But is there continuous recruiting, continuous support? We could go on and on. But, you know, I sort of look at this range of continuous testing between something that requires a lot of effort to define and requires a lot of human knowledge, expertise on the product in order to perform the task. And while continuous integration and delivery is something that can be automated, it's very easy to do every night, every hour. So continuous testing is lumped in with this, continuous integration, continuous delivery. But can we actually get to our goal of continuous testing, and what does that mean? How do we get to that same level of continuous as continuous integration and continuous testing? Again, this is the request, right? Testing needs to be finished by tomorrow. No ifs, ands, or buts. And while the continuous integration and the continuous delivery cousins can quickly achieve that, there's a lot that needs to be done on the testing side in order to get to that same level of continuity. Before I move on, I still haven't talked about how we get there yet, but I want to introduce the other challenge of mobile testing versus browser testing. And while both are complicated in their own right, I want to just compare and talk about what makes mobile testing different than browser testing. When you look at browser testing just in the pure numbers, we've got a few different browser types, and you can test some permutation of those browser types on different versions. So you're looking at, let's say, 3 to 6 browsers you want to test, and the last 10 versions, you're looking at 30 to 60 permutations that you want to test against. You can typically, when you're testing on browser, you can go out to a handful of companies that provide the ability to run a VM of that browser, a virtual machine of that browser, to execute your tests. So that's something that is, you can spin that up quickly, you can run your tests, and you can get the results back quickly. The other point about browser testing is when it comes to scripting and automation. There are a handful of companies that have very good record and playback capabilities. One of the companies we partner with here at Kobiton is a company called Catalan that allows you to record a test, and it makes it it's a lot easier to do in the browser world because there's a W3C specification for HTML and how that should look. And of late, most of the browsers adhere to that specification. They test against that specification. So when you're actually selecting an element on one browser, that element is represented the same way in all the other browsers. But when you move on, when you look at it, browser testing is looking a lot more like continuous integration, continuous delivery. Those are things that you can get to, you can repeat that process very quickly. On the mobile testing side, it's a different story. What we're talking about here is thousands of device types, each with, let's say, 10 versions of the operating system. And you've got other challenges with mobile where there's a geographic component. The device is moving, and in that movement, the carrier speed may slow down, the carrier speed may be interrupted. There is limited processing power on mobile devices, although they're getting stronger and stronger every day, more and more powerful every day. There's still limitations on what it can do, and the apps themselves have crashes. While all of us have been on a browser where it's just gotten hung, it's a lot less common than an app that crashes. So when we look at the elements themselves and the record and playback capability, or just generating an automation script from a manual session, that doesn't, up to this point, it's been a real challenge for mobile because there is no W3 specification, right? Everybody has their own, each manufacturer has their own way that they want to render their user interface because they see it as a competitive differentiator against their competition. So what Samsung versus LG, and even different versions of Samsung, different device types of Samsung will render the DOM, render the XML different. That makes it very difficult for traditional methods that work well on the browser to be able to capture a session on one device type and then run that, execute that across different device types. And then the other thing, there are some other challenges, just the whole concept of an app store. Yeah, there's not an app store in the browser world. The median app store rating is 2.6. A lot of that's caused by crashes. And the main reason, 73% of crashes in the app store occur because the app was not tested on the crash device type. One of our customers is a mobile first, one of the mobile elite companies, and they have over 1,500 devices that they test on Kobiton to protect against this. So they have manual testers and some automation that go pretty much around the clock, about 1 million minutes a month, to test on these different device types, all these varieties, because every device matters. And we've gotten requests. A good example is we got a request a couple weeks ago. We have a bug that's only happening on the Orange network in London. Can we get a device set up there? So, our job as Kobiton is to go and set up a data center there where we can host that device for that condition. And so, one of the powers of our this isn't a sales pitch on Kobiton, but one of the powers of our platform is the ability to do that. We had that set up in about 24 hours. So when we look at where does the continuous testing stand for mobile, it's further off to the left. So I think we've done a good job in getting continuous testing closer to its cousins on the right, on the web side. But unfortunately, for the mobile side, we're sort of going further away. And I'm going to try to get us closer to their cousins. But before I do that, I did want to go through the results of a survey that Kobiton did this year. And the survey is state of test automation this year. And the survey was done against, we had 351 responders. The distribution was heavily weighted towards, mobile critical and mobile strategic. So a lot of the respondees were focusing on mobile, and there was about 25% who were still looking into it or didn't have any plans to. And there are a few things that I wanted to call out. I highly recommend you get a copy of this survey. I think it's a couple hundred pages, and it looks at the different segmentation of the market. You can pick your company size or your number of testers and sort of see how you can compare. And it's beneficial if you're trying to get a point across to your manager of things that you need. This is a good way to communicate that, here's what the rest of the industry is doing. So the one thing here that I want to point out that I thought was interesting is that, we have over 50% of the respondees, and this is across all company sizes, all revenue sizes, over 50% have released their application either daily or weekly. So that's a significant number, but there's still, about 50% that release it monthly or quarterly. And then I'm going to talk one of the questions was around just the capability to update automation. And, this is one of the challenges with mobile, over much more so than web, and that about only 7% are able to update their automation scripts in less than a day. So when we come back to that topic of continuous testing, and what this says indirectly is that less than 7% of the market actually can get to continuous testing. And I would say that to be right alongside this continuous integration and continuous deployment cousins, that the turnaround time to get to continuous testing would need to be less than 6 hours. And so here we have, less than 7% are able to update their automation in less than a day. And what's the other, if you look at the data behind this, there isn't a lot of variability between companies that have one tester and companies that have over 50 testers. So there's a consistency in just how quickly these are updated. I think this is something that is easily to just breeze over and not spend some time on, but I think it's important what this says. So, the question is, what's the primary strategic driver for your organization pursuing a test automation strategy? And I think, people most of the time would think, oh, it's to reduce costs. And that's only around 10% of the respondees said it was to reduce costs. The majority was around improving quality, and then right behind it is time to market. And that, I think that says something, right? That says that we can't, as testers, we can't get the level of quality that we want to get to today, or we can't get to market as fast as we want to today. We need support from automation in order to help us expand the quality that we currently have, to improve on it, and also to accelerate our time to market. That's what this says. It's automation is not a cost reduction approach. It's a way to improve upon something we already do and we want to do better. And when we come back to continuous testing, this is where we want to be. We want to get to market faster. We want to have high quality when we deliver we test continuously. But there are a lot of impediments to getting there. And then when we look at what's the biggest struggle with you starting a test automation strategy today, and it's finding the right tools. There's a pretty even distribution here versus the previous question, but a lot of it's around skills and tooling, right? So how do we get the right tools, and how do we train our people or hire our people to support automation? So again, I'm sorry, I ended up here again, which is I'm still talking about the challenges and why mobile is hard when it comes to continuous testing, and haven't yet offered up a lot of solutions. I'm hoping to get there, so bear with me. Again, when I look at what is our target for continuous testing, what does that mean? It's a term, but what should we set as a realistic approach for achieving, having it be on par with its continuous integration and continuous deployment cousins? Is it, I think I use the 6 hour mark. I think most CI/CD components run in less than 2 hours. So somebody checks in their code to GitHub. There is a build process that happens. That build process takes anywhere between 10 minutes and 2 hours. There is some level of testing, at the lower levels at the lower environments, that testing can be unit testing and just linting of the code. As you get further on into the higher environments, this is where continuous testing needs to be put in place before the deployment is performed, or right after the deployment is performed. So, getting to that 6 hour mark is sort of I would say our goal. And then it also means, to get to that 6 hour goal, that if right now the market's telling us that it takes that 90% or 93% of the market is not able to update their automation within a day, we need to figure out how to update our automation navigation seamlessly. So Some in the AI market would refer to this as self-healing. So how do I, when I have a new release of my product, how do I not have all of my automation break? And then the second part is, now that I've run my automation against whether it's 30 browsers or 50 different device types and versions, how do I verify the output of that automation without significant effort? You could, let's say your prioritized test automation takes an hour. On the browser side, that's 30 hours of output of exhaust from the test. And how do I verify the output without actually combing through or watching video from all of those tests? Even if it's at twice the speed, you're dealing with a lot of time. And then on the mobile side, how do you cover a variety of device types at scale? You're looking at 20 plus, more than 20 devices to really get the coverage that you want. And how can I achieve that coverage really quickly, right? I need some way to get access to 20 devices, and I need to run those tests in parallel. And then the final part of this is, how do I cover not just functional, which is important, but how can I also cover performance, UI? If something was broken, something broke during the release, where a screen rendered the button below the fold or partially hidden, just from a brand perspective, that has a big impact. And accessibility, how do I test the accessibility? There have been a lot of, especially for big corporations, lawsuits on the accessibility side, because on mobile, some companies haven't been as haven't pushed forward as much on accessibility. And there was a Supreme Court case that just recently ruled that it was a requirement for the corporations to achieve that same level of accessibility, and they can't have it as a lower priority. It is a top priority for companies like UPS and Delta. So I'm gonna stop right here real quickly and talk about how Kobiton sees this challenge of continuous testing for mobile. And I'm going to do a quick demo of a product we call Intelligent Test Automation. So I'm going to hop over to the Kobiton platform. And so this is, for those of you who have not seen Kobiton, this is, we have a list of devices, a set of devices here that are real devices that anyone can get access to. You can, say we have a few hundred here, and we support those devices both for public, you can sign up and use any of these devices on demand and pay essentially a monthly fee for a certain number of minutes, or you can get devices that are dedicated to your organization that nobody else would have access to, and you can host those yourself. In this, with the current situation with COVID-19, especially in the United States, where we were used to just going in and grabbing one of the devices in the closet, that's not really possible anymore. So, we provide the ability for testers to connect remotely to devices in the office or devices we host. So I'm going to just go down and pull up, let's see, what's a good one? The Note. Okay, I'm going to pull up this Galaxy Note 10 and I'm going to launch it. And I'm going to go through a test, manual test, that is using the REI application. And this REI application, I'm going to go ahead and order a pair of boots that I saw recently. And so you can see this is a real device. There is an app repository, and I can go and search on this app repository for for the apps that I have access to. So the app has been installed. Now, one of the cool things about intelligent test automation is you'll see this oftentimes with the prompts. These are the entitlements. This one is a location entitlement from the RAI application, and this entitlement pop-up, which allows access to the device's location, appears different on different device types and operating systems and operating system versions. So we have at Kobiton have mapped all of those. So when I'm clicking allow here, if the prompt on an iPhone 6s is yes, we will recognize that. So I'm going to go ahead and shop products. Again, I want to get through this pretty quickly. I'm going to look for a boot called the Chelsea. You can see how responsive it is. I can use my keyboard to type in. I'm going to choose this boot. I'm going to pick the size, and I'm going to, espresso is the only one. I'm going to say add to cart. Again, this is lightning fast. I'm going to go to the cart, and I'm going to say check out, and that's the end of my test. And when I finish my test, I'll be presented with this pop-up, which gives me the ability to choose what other devices I want to run against. So, in this case, I'm going to run against the top 20 globally. There are some devices that we currently don't have or are being utilized right now. So this will get me to, I'm going to run these same test steps that I just ran on that Galaxy Note 10 across all these other device types. And so when that actually runs, this is what the actual results look like. So we now kick this test that I just ran across about 18 of those devices, and in the background, it's running the same test that I just ran. We're using machine learning to solve the problem of running that test across different device types and having it rendered differently. This is a really hard problem because each of the manufacturers are rendering their DOM differently. So after this finishes, we're going to have the output of 18 different tests. So now how do I comb through all of those results, and what do we get out of it? Well, one of the first things we get is crash detection. So we will identify any crashes automatically that happened on those 18 devices. And you'll be given the ability here to see exactly what happened. Hold on a second. You'll be able to decide how you want to handle it. Let's say it happened and you want to see if it happened again. You can go and just click reproduce. You can see the full device logs. And if you want to ignore it, a crash, there's not much you can do except have it fixed. You can connect right here to a Jira ticket to submit that and send it to the developer. They will get a link into this actual screen where they can see what happened. And they can also go to the actual session output where they can see CPU, memory, other components of what was going on the device when this happened. The other type of check that we do is textual verification. So we're using some OCR techniques to identify when the text is different across different device types. So instead of having to go through and watch the video for 18 sessions, we will raise these automatically and allow you to tell us how you want to handle that. And we have a recommendation engine that goes through and looks at the commonalities between all the cases where these were different and gives you a recommendation on the next best step. So Here we have the ability for you to define granular levels of comparison. In this case, the text wraps differently. And so you can say, I want to have relaxed placement. I want the text to be the same, but I want the ability to have it wrap differently. And I can also choose what scope I want. So if we identify that this happens, on all devices with aspect ratios of 4:3, then we would make that recommendation. But if you just wanted to change the aspect ratio here, the aspect ratio for this LG G6 is 18.5 to 9. And that would mean if you added another device tomorrow that had 18.5 to 9 and it had this structure of text, we wouldn't raise a test execution issue. We would automatically say, okay, that's okay, because that's what the tester has requested. So that's the types of assertions we perform. I'm going to finish up with this and jump back to the slides and talk about what we have coming up in the next few months. How do we achieve continuous testing taking that approach? And I'm going to put forth an approach that I suggest as a way to get to continuous testing or close to continuous testing with mobile, where you can run a manual test, and there's this phase called refine, where you're going through and you're making sure that the test can execute successfully across these 18 different devices. I introduced this term blockers here, and the blockers, our machine learning is really good, but there are cases where we are not able to find the element, and we present to you a user interface where you can resolve it yourself. And so, this is an example of a blocker here on that application. The user action was login, but you can see the challenge that our machine learning has had, because the login button is occluded by this no thanks button. So you can see that things highlight over here on the right-hand side in the Galaxy J5. And so all I have to do is select that and then submit. The test will be restarted, and it will go through and know what to do when it hits that step. We also support on blockers is scrolling. So the common challenge is you're trying to scroll through a list and we couldn't find the element. And when you go back up to the top, you can see that part of the reason is it just so here's the one that I wanted to match. So here I can select it and submit. That phase, which is this refinement phase, is getting all of the navigation blockers resolved. Our machine learning catches about 95% of the navigation, and then right now we're about 5% require some remediation, and we're getting that higher and higher every day. Once that's refined, the test is refined, then you're focused on remediating the actual test execution issue. So when text changes from release to release, or there's a visual issue with how the screen renders, we will catch that and provide the ability for you to create the defect through Jira, send that to the developer, and then you've got this continuous test and continuous integration loop between dev and test until you have a product that's ready to deliver. And our goal is to have that remediation done within within an hour, where you can get the results and be able to remediate those. Our goal here to iterate quickly is to review the output from the test execution, create the defects directly from the UI, and then remediate acceptable issues from app changes. So if a new app, you have an app change and there's a new element, you can accept that as the ongoing baseline. We're also supporting the automation engineer. So with our Appium Anywhere product, we will essentially have the way to autocorrect a navigation error when you're running Appium and it cannot find an element. We, like I showed, the crash detection, we've got visual validation. We can identify user interface issues across different device types and operating systems. And we also support, we will be supporting in Q4 the ability to automatically update automation based on the new app releases. And our reporting, this is one of our most powerful capabilities, is the ability to see how your app has trended over time in terms of defects, whether the test execution issues were related to the app or to the test script itself. And so now we're finally getting there. I hope that was helpful explanation of how we could get to continuous testing with mobile. And I'd like to open it up to questions now. Hand it back to you, Carla.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions. Somebody was wondering where they could get a link for the survey, and you should have received the link. Everyone should have received the link, but if not, I will also put it in the chat, and we'll also include the survey in the follow-up email when we send out the recording. Our next question wants to know, where should I run the continuous testing pipeline, on developed or release branch?
So on the, every company will have a different branch structure, and the pipeline itself is going to be dependent on how you've structured your continuous integration pipeline. So the app that I work on, we actually, the flow that we have is, we have a development branch. When the developers check in their code to that development branch, at the end of the day, we take all of the commits that have been made to that development branch. We compile that into an executable, two executables, one IPA and one APK file, and we push those to Kobiton. Once they're pushed to Kobiton, we have a set of Appium scripts that execute against that APK and the IPA files, and report any failures back to, we have a push notification to Slack. So if there are any errors, they get pushed to Slack. The developers go and fix those, and then once that's done, for our pipeline, we go ahead and push that to production.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question wants to know, are there explicit assertions for ITA on roadmap?
So we have certain explicit assertions that will be included. With the fact that it's scriptless, we're staying away from the putting code into ITA from a user perspective. But the way that we plan on implementing that is to allow the tester to annotate specific parts of the user interface and put assertions like contains or begins with into those visual assertions. We'll also be in the September 20th release supporting data-driven testing that will allow you to create a variety of input data and visual assertions that go along with the input data, so that as you use data to drive your tests, you can not just do it to navigate, but you can also do it to assert.
Awesome. Our next question wants to know, can you run tests on a single page application website?
I assume it's for ITA. So we can do that on our Kobiton product for DLM, our device lab management product. You can run on a single page application. For ITA, that feature is going to be available on the November 2nd release. So we will be able to run it against both hybrid applications. Hybrid applications are applications that are native but have a web component embedded within it. And that embedded web component could be something as simple as just a farm out to Twitter, where Twitter is embedded in the application, or it might be the entire, some cases it's pretty much the entire application. We will be supporting both of those hybrid and web apps, so single page applications on the mobile device in the November 2nd release.
Great, thank you. Our next question wants to know, can we configure the mobile network based on the required region and then test it?
Yeah, so the mobile network, there are a few different parts to this. One is the carrier, but then it's just, let's say you wanted to, we have one customer who wants to masquerade. They want to present themselves like they're coming from a certain region. In this case, our customers in Australia, they have a video streaming app that only works in Australia, and they want to make sure that it works in Australia and it doesn't work anywhere else. Now, there are a few ways to accomplish that. One is, for them specifically, they actually look at the IP address and make sure that the IP address is presenting itself. So we can set up a proxy that allows you to masquerade the device so that it looks like it's coming from Australia. So even though the device is sitting in Atlanta, that we will proxy it through Australia, and it appears like it's in Australia, and you can test that way. To actually test the carrier, if you wanted to go that far, we would have to work with you to deploy or set up a new data center potentially in a specific geography to test on a carrier.
Great, I hope that answers your question. Our next question wants to know that they are interested in the visual validation, visual regression testing. How do you do this?
Yeah, so it's my greatest question of, I'm really into visual verification right now and how we do this. If you look at some of the other tools out there, and you might be familiar with them, there are a couple of products that have really been the pioneers in visual validation. The one that started 5 years or so ago is a company called Applitools. They are one of the leaders in this space, and they do a tremendous job in allowing the user to verify from release to release. And what that means is in their user interface, they will compare a new version with a previous version. The comparison level is adjustable by the tester. So you can say, I want this to be exact, pixel for pixel. It's going to show you pretty much the whole screen most of the time. Or you can do something that's a little bit, it's not pixel by pixel. They allow for a few pixels off, and that is called strict. The next level up from that is you can just look at content, or you can look at layout. So those are sort of two different ways to look at it. What we're doing is we're using our machine learning to identify automatically the different parts or the different types of fields in an app. We can identify using machine learning what is dynamic content, and we will not run a content assertion on something that has dynamic content. So right now, what you would need to do in other products is go through and actually annotate and specify at the screen level what's dynamic and what's not. What we're able to do is identify that through machine learning and not raise that to you as an issue. We can also identify static content and focus the dynamic content on layout, and the static content, including both layout and content. The other thing that we're doing that we're really excited about, and there's a webinar that we're going to be partnering with TechWell that's in August, that is going to really focus on this topic. It's going to focus on visual verification, and I'll share with you at that time some of the innovation that we're implementing related to visual verification.
Great, yes, and I will send you guys the link to register for that webinar if you are interested. It's called How Visual Testing Makes Your Mobile App Stand Out in a Good Way. You can find it on TechWell's website as well. Our next question wants to know, do the testers need to have any kind of coding knowledge?
No.
Short and simple. So our next question wants to know, can you run tests on iOS devices for iPads?
We currently do not support tablets with ITA. We are getting that request quite a lot. I think it comes up at least once a day in our calls, and we are prioritizing it on our roadmap. There's no, the limitation is simply a restriction we put in the back end because of the size of the screen, but we're going to be try to get that release for the September 20th release.
Awesome. Our next question wants to know, does ITA work with locally hosted devices?
Again, one of those things that it's easy to do. We haven't turned that on yet, but we will be turning on also for the September 20th release. Feel like there's somebody on Kobiton sales team that's answering these questions or asking these questions because they're all the ones that we're getting asked by our customers and prospects on a daily basis.
So we have a couple more questions, and if you guys, we run out of time, we can also answer your questions at another time, or we can send you guys an email to answer any of your questions. So we'll probably do like 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Great. So one of the next questions wants to know, how do you choose which test to run for continuous testing?
Yeah, that is one of the, go back to one of the comments I made early and in the presentation where I said the value we as testers provide as we go through this process of this needs to be tested by tomorrow. Our value is deciding which tests to run, and that it's a risk assessment, right? Because there are a limited number of tests that can be run. There are limited resources that can be run in a certain period, and our job it's as important to actually verify the results and make sure the app works, it doesn't crash. It's as important to actually choose which tests to execute. So that process, and we've got some exciting things on the roadmap further out. You don't want to if you have a test that succeeds every single time, what's the value of that test? Or you have a test that's flaky, what's the value of that test? What we want to get to is really this concept of a test value, or a test case value, and put a score on it. So that score will reflect how often it finds issues, how often it or finds defects, how often it finds, how often it's just doesn't have flakiness. And putting a score next to that will help with the priority. The other thing is, what part of the app has changed. Being able to automatically detect from your, you've got 1,000 tests. Can we choose 10 of those tests to do a quick impact analysis? Do a quick assessment of what's changed in the app, and focus on tests in that functional area. These are all things that we'll be working on over the next year to make it easier for the tester to make those decisions.
Great. I hope that answers your question. I think we have time for one more question. So this person wants to know, do you have plans to integrate with Azure DevOps for defect reporting?
So it's we do. We currently have a DevOps integration for the execution against Kobiton, and we have been getting a lot of requests for, instead of Jira, to use Azure DevOps for defect recording, and we'll be doing that integration. I'm not sure when. Probably sometime in early 2021, as based on our current schedule for 2020.
Awesome. Well, I hope that answers everyone's questions. We really appreciate your time with us today. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you everyone for participating today. Very helpful.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining.